Welcome to the new series of Beyond the Fringe. Can't be there, be here. I really wanted to come out of the Edinburgh Fringe and at least extend a season to 6 episodes. It's where I usually start. Being able to get to a 6-episode series makes me feel like I've managed to accomplish another little set of media. And it's really important, I think, for media to be made regularly, talking to the people that you find or I find interesting, the people who are doing stuff around me. It's an opportunity to bring people on screen and just have a talk about what's going on regionally in the East Midlands, where I'm based, but also, what's going on with festivals and what's going on in the arts and what's going on in our little personal, professional circles. And when we do need to then promote things, we hope have the attention of the algorithm, because who knows what that algorithm is doing. Well, today I have got a good friend, a Nottingham local storyteller who I've been doing live streams for Beast and Tales now for over a year. How scary is that? So I'm going to welcome on screen Tim Ralphs. When I can hit the button. Hello, Tim.
Hello, Caron. Good to have you. And I feel like I should be welcoming you back from Edinburgh, even though you weren't literally physically there.
Yeah. I couldn't be there, but I was here. And I think that sense of presence when things are going on elsewhere physically, that we do now have this digital and virtual world that, COVID and the pandemic gave us, and finding a way of keeping that inflated and keeping that occupied is a real challenge. Yeah.
And a big shout out to everyone who's finished at the Fringe and is now in that kind of odd post-Fringe state. I know it's been nearly a decade since I last did a full run at the Fringe, and I can remember the kind of like exhaustion, and then after the exhaustion, this odd sense of the best I can describe it is this odd sense of being indestructible. In fact, still to this day, sometimes if it feels like life is grinding me down, I will go, yeah, but is this as bad as the Edinburgh Fringe? And then it just picks me up, because the answer is nothing is ever as exhausting and as like soul-crushingly weird emotional roller coaster of an experience.
It is so intense. I mean, it's 3 weeks of, if you go for the whole 3 weeks, or even if you go for a week, I think if you go for a week, you've got that sense of you go to a party and then they leave well before it's finished, and that's always weird. But on the same hand, you don't want to stay until the party is well and truly over and you're the last person to leave, because that's just soul destroying. So there is a balance. I mean, touring, I toured for many years, and that in itself has a relentless tiredness that happens, but you kind of go into a zone, and then when it finishes, you're kind of quite relieved. Or if you do a run of a play, it's exhilarating. But then by the time you get to, week 3 or 4 of a regular run, you're kind of ready to do something next. Or if you're doing a whole year
with grease paint, and you're reciting the lines in your sleep.
Yeah. And then it becomes a job. If you're down at the West End and you're on a show that runs, and you're lucky enough to be on an ongoing contract of a show that's, or a venue that's running for, a couple of years. I think that's very rare now, but I know some of the contracts that I was offered towards my time in London, they were jobs, and it's, did you want to be a jobber, or did you want to be, going between projects? Yeah. So we're reaching the end of summertime.
What's happened with that? So I realise that it's the most English thing in the world to talk about the weather, but I have been waiting for the sort of second wind of summer, the kind of like rush of heat to mark the sort of and it hasn't come. And there's been a few people. I was in a meeting on Thursday morning, I think it was, and there are a few in the meeting going like, I almost reached for a hot water bottle last night, and it's still August. So that was my brief what's happened to the summer. Where did it go?
I think on the news at lunchtime, the weather forecaster did say that we've just entering equatorial autumn, or some kind of autumn official. It's like, that never gets announced. We've normally got a little bit of sun, but
Yep.
it has been very odd. I mean, my summer has kind of been the whole of July and the whole of August. In July, I was very fortunate to go away for 3 weeks. I was on the island of Mull, came back, did the Edinburgh Fringe. What is your summer?
Yeah, so goodness. So I work as a storyteller, and we might get into what that is in a bit anyway. And so I've had a couple of performance-based projects and a couple of sort of the other thing which I do, which is a lot of facilitation and training. So I'm working with a group of Black women professors at the University of Leeds at the moment to talk about how storytelling can be used to both disseminate the information from their research, but also so they can there share the stories of what their lives have been like and how they've got to where they are, and the sort of challenges that they face, and the various things that they're excited about and working on at the moment. And then I'm doing a similar thing which will finish at the Autonomous University of Barcelona in a few weeks, where conservationists and anthropologists from around the world will be gathering, and I've been working with them to build up sort of stories that they can tell and share about their life and their work. So that's been really good. And then performance-wise, I think the most interesting bit of performance work I've done over the summer has been at the British Museum. Now, it's a lovely gig. I do occasionally work for the Young Friends of the British Museum, which is what they do at these sleepovers. They will bring in the young friends who might be anything from 9 years old up to about 15 years old, and activities are arranged during the evening, and then they get to sleep over in the museum. They roll out their sleeping bags down by the Sphinx heads and spend the night. And I'm not going to get into the controversy that is the British Museum. It's just nice to be paid. So I was doing some stories as part of the night, themed with the travelling exhibition that was there. And it's a gig I've done before, but for the first time, the security were really weird, like a little bit draconian, very strict, and it was an odd vibe. And then the week after, obviously the news broke that there'd been a series of alleged, I think it's still alleged, thefts from the British Museum. So now I look back and go, no wonder security were being really weird with us. They probably had some sense that there were odd things happening in the background. Either that, or they thought that we were with Just Stop Oil and that we were going to take the opportunity to turn the storytelling into a protest. Who knows? Yeah. So that's been some of the things I've been up to.
So how does that say as a story? So as a professional storyteller, I mean, quite often people say, "Oh, I want to be a storyteller," and they have jobs that they're doing that then enable them to be storytellers. And I think it's always really important to assert yourself as the thing that you aspire to be, especially if you're being paid to do that on occasions and not sort of sideline yourself. So for you as a storyteller, what's been your journey as a storyteller, and what does that entail?
Yeah, wow, what an interesting question. And I think, there's a sort of obligation on storytellers to come up with a good origin story for them. And here, unfortunately, I haven't really got. There's not a kind of key chrysalis moment from which I emerge as a storyteller. So just to put it very briefly, storytelling as I practice it is the art of telling traditional stories, folk tales, fairy tales, myths, legends. And in this country, it had a revival that sort of followed the folk revival of the 60s and 70s. It happened mostly in the 80s. There was plenty of storytelling going on in community settings, in a lot of marginalized communities, so traveller storytellers and so forth, and then interfaith settings as well. But as a child, my parents took me to a lot of folk festivals. And at those festivals, I came across people like Hugh Lupton, Dan Kedding, Duffy Thomason, who just told stories. So I was aware that there were people whose vocation was to go from place to place with this enormous repertoire of stories that they knew, and just have the capacity to tell them and tell them and tell them, and to change them and shift them based on the audience and the needs of the audience and what was right for them in and of that setting. I started my first storytelling club in my school library when I was a teenager, and then I drifted away from it for a bit. I went to university and got distracted by other things like caving and other exploits. But in my early to mid-20s, I sort of rediscovered storytelling. I was involved with the Young Storyteller of the Year competition because I was young once. And then from, it really got going in about 2007 onwards. It's been an increasing part of my life to work with material, to make shows, to develop training programs. And it all is rooted in traditional material and the semi-unscripted, semi-improvised, in rapport with the audience, live act of telling stories.
Yeah. And I think it makes you a very good facilitator. What sort of facilitation training, how do you share your storytelling skills? Because one thing that I've noticed when we've been doing Zoom calls, especially with the equity branch that we've done, you're always very aware of when people are wanting to speak on screen, and I'm always really grateful that you kind of have this spidey sense of who wants to speak.
Yeah, I think that some of that may be a neurodiversity question, and I think that I learned from quite an early age. I've internalized sort of mentally keeping track of who is and who isn't talking, which is, we don't need to go into that here. But yeah, I think online spaces are interesting, and I've been fascinated, even from before lockdown, I've been fascinated by what works in online spaces. So I sort of think that part of one's job as a storyteller is to respond to the space that you're in. And that might be give consideration to the audience. You tell a story very differently. If your audience is a load of 11-year-olds to if it's an adult audience, it might be the same story, broadly the same beats, but you tell it very differently. Or it might be changed. If we sat next to each other around a campfire, then the story's going to be really different to if this is a black box theatre and you're kind of invisibly in the audience, and this needs to be a more physical and coherent and theatrical, I'll use that word, a piece of work. So I think it's part of the storyteller's obligation and toolkit to respond to space. And I think that still applies going into the online world. So during lockdown, I got involved in quite a lot of online telling, unsurprisingly. And I look at some of the projects that came out of that, like the Game of Seven Candles, which was kind of me and Sarah Lisa and Adverse Camber going, okay, but if you purpose build something for Zoom, not even for online, but for Zoom, and you start playing with things like gallery view and like, what can you do? And we had 100 odd people who blacked out their rooms, got their lights out, and all had their little candles lit as we were telling creepy ghost stories, with at the end of each story a candle being blown out. And the beauty of everyone's screen that was bringing them the light of everyone else's candle also darkening. So this real sort of sense of, anyway, but it's all the same thing. It's all about, it's the same kind of sensitivity to space and the needs of people that are in that space and what works to communicate differently in those environments. So I think it's is that an answer? Is that an answer?
Yeah. And so being, say, a storyteller, you mentioned Adverse Camber, sort of a local storyteller group.
They're a storytelling production company.
So in terms of, there's organisations. There's the Equity's got a storytelling network. Just tell me a little bit about, if anybody is watching and is a storyteller and wants to sort of assert themselves more as a storyteller, where are the places that you can kind of register with or find your tribe? Because there's a lot of storytelling festivals where, and the thing I love about the storytelling community is they inhabit their own audiences as well. And I think that's quite rare. For people who perform, you often promote your show and you're never likely to go to someone else's show unless it's your friend. But I've noticed that a lot of storytellers actually will be on stage and then they'll be in the audience of the person. So there is a tribal nature to it.
I think it's because a lot of it sounds obvious to say it, but I think a lot of storytellers love storytelling as an art form and love the stories, and it's quite a small art form. So if you want to hear, I think there's also, and I'm sure that a lot of people have this, writers, poets, and so forth, where a lot of the work, it feels very sociable, but it's actually very lonely, because a lot of the time is spent, maybe it's answering an email, and a lot of it's like, oh, I'll read through some fragments of Greek myth and then talk to the wall for a bit in order to memorize them. So the opportunity to actually go and be with other people and share, it's rare and precious. So if you're a storyteller and you're professional, there is an Equity Storytellers Network, which is a really good resource. And look, I'm a strong advocate for trade unions anyway, so I think it's a great thing to be a part of Equity. And it's nice now that the Storytelling Network is there, and it feels like Equity now has a place where, it can come and understand what storytelling is and the particular challenges that storytellers face and the particular role that they play in the wider arts scene. So that's really good. There is a Society for Storytelling. I'm just double checking. Their website, sfs.org.uk, sfs.org.uk. And that's great if you're a fan of storytelling, whether you're a performer or not. A lot of events get listed there, so it's a good place to find out what's going on near you locally. There is something of a club network throughout the UK, so that might be a good place if you're sort of totally new to storytelling to get on the SFS website, have a look and see what clubs there might be near you that you either want to go along to, have a listen, maybe have a go. Those are some good ways in.
And what I said, flavours of storytellers. So at the Edinburgh Fringe and the festivals, you'll often have, theatre, musical theatre, drama, opera, musical. With storytelling, I often see poetry, spoken word, and storytelling. Do they all exist under the same banner? Are they festivals create their own categories? In story festivals, are there different categories? What sort of range of storytellers are there?
Yeah, what a lovely question. So I think it's somewhere like the Edinburgh Fringe, and certainly this was the case when I was last there, storytelling fit most neatly under the umbrella of spoken word, right? Where if you had a one-person show and it wasn't overtly comedy, but it was still just one person talking for an hour, spoken word was a good place to put it. And I think for a while under the Arts Council, storytelling counted as live literature. What a wonderful phrase, live literature. Within the storytelling scene, there's this sort of, it's not even a rivalry, but there is a distinction, I think, to be drawn between anecdotal stories, maybe in the format of The Moth, where people tell stories, family stories or stories from their own life, so kind of true stories. And there's loads of people doing great work on that. And I think that has fit in with the Fringe and with perhaps the broader art scene more. I think that's been more visible in recent years. People just sort of talking about stories from their own life, comedic or tragic or poignant. And then there's the storytelling that I do, which is predominantly traditional stories. So, as I said, folk tales, fairy tales, and so forth. And like I love it all. I love it all. I am aware. This is some deep lore, I suppose. Here, a lot of the people who are maybe a few decades older than me, the generation above me in the storytelling world that I inhabit, are quite strict in their definitions. And I put that down to the fact that they had to put so much energy and passion into getting our kind of storytelling established that they had to be really clear in their vision of what they wanted to do. And I'm very grateful to them for it. But what it means is that I now have this slightly more open space, which okay, other people have really, they've laid something of a path. There are festivals happening and so forth, explicitly storytelling festivals. Maybe I will make a thing up here rather than it being traditional or blend things a bit or feel like, oh great, I want to do a show, but I've got a gap in the first half. I'll bring Tom Juniper in and he'll do some poems for a bit. I know that Tom has just finished a run at the Edinburgh Fringe as well. Shout out to him there. So lots of interesting crossovers and cross-fertilizations. And I think it goes with what inspires us as well. Like I am eternally inspired by stand-up comics because I think that that sense of this will sound really spontaneous, regardless of whether it is, but it'll sound spontaneous. It feels like it's been created in rapport with the audience as it happens. I think in many ways, that's the closest skill set to the storyteller's skill set. The difference is repertoire. That's the other thing you have to explore.
Story and theatre and film and television, it's all under that banner of entertainment. But I think, especially with storytelling, there can often be something that's deeper and more visceral about relaying a deep truth. And on occasions, when people are telling stories from their life, especially if they have a political foundation, there can be a point of needing to be aware of your own safety and security. And I don't know, there seems to be a story that we were talking about in sort of the digital green room of a storyteller. Did you want to just say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I know what you're alluding to there. So maybe I should just double check.
Just the story. Yeah, just the story. I think the reason why, I was keen to make these podcasts about us talking about real things, and the state of the world and the state of the planet right now is something that is actually quite hard to talk about. And I know when you mentioned you're going to tell us about the situation, but I think we kind of assume that names that aren't totally English in origin or locations. And I was just thinking it was
there's a couple of different strands here. One is to shout out that today has been to acknowledge that today has been the day that the news has broken about Odubanjo's death. He was a poet who was scheduled to perform at Shambhala Festival last weekend, and it's been announced today that his body was found in a river. He never made it to his gig, and I know that the ripples of that are still being really felt in the spoken word community today. So enormous love to anyone who's been touched by that, and to the family. And there are questions being raised about police involvement and race and all sorts of things. But I'll let people do their own research and dig into that.
And I think that it's important to if anyone wants to put in the comments who's got questions. I think talking amongst our communities within the arts, it's really important that we look out for each other. And I know I do work with a charity called Safety Curtain, where the byline that we have is keeping the flame of culture alive in the darkest of times. And I think quite often stories are the things that get us through those dark times.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a power to storytelling. And I don't want to say that storytelling has more or less power than other art forms. It has its own power. It's a different power. And part of the project I'm doing at the moment with conservationists and anthropologists is, like, often they have really important stories to tell that are controversial and complicated and might not fit into established narratives. And if you try and just present those as a set of facts, people can get a little bit cynical or a little bit jaded, or they might want to argue with them. But if you just say, well, I was on this patch of land that's now a national park, and this is what I saw, and this is the conversations I had with the people that are there, this is how it touched me, this is how it made me felt. It's hard to argue with that, right? Like it short circuits a lot of the maybe mental defenses that we might have, and it lets the information penetrate a lot more deeply. Like, I think it reaches us in a far more felt and visceral space.
Yeah. And you're keeping sort of storytelling events alive in Nottingham, the East Midlands as well, because Beast and Tales is something that you've continued to maintain. So although you've been off doing projects, there is something about maintaining an event sequence. Like, I feel it's important for me to do these 6 series, and I want to hold events and being able to go through the motions of bringing people together and programming that and having a core narrative that you can share with your community. So tell us, as we start to bring this to a close, Beast and Tales, what's what's on the agenda for
What's on the docket?
autumn and winter of
So
2023?
Beast and Tales is the third Wednesday of the month, and at the moment we're meeting at the Catholic Church Hall at Foster Avenue. We get about 40 people turn up. It's a great little crowd there, cafe and things as well. And every month we showcase a touring show, a show that's being toured by either a national or international artist that's visiting. So the next one is in September. Caron will be running the live stream. She's our technology guru, which means that wherever you are, you can come along and have a listen. And the show that evening, it's going to be a slightly different format because it'll be a longer piece. So it'll be two halves of one show. Fabulous storyteller called Dominic Kelly telling the story of the Mara. And the Mara is a Scandinavian and also sometimes bits of North Scotland as well, because of, I suspect, the old Viking roots. The malevolent spirit that possesses people at night and drives them to all sorts of maleficence. And then there's stories of how you can protect yourself, what you can do to save your loved ones. So I think it's going to be quite a dark one. You know what? I think we can handle a little bit of something creepy coming in. So that'll be in September. It'd be great to see some of you there.
Well, it's been fantastic to have you on the show. It's great to start me back on the, beyond the fringe, because there's lots of fringes, and we'll be going forward with that anybody is an equity member or they are industry worker entering the industry, new career, and you're equity curious.
I love that phrase. If you're equity curious, do come along. We're meeting in the Leicester Curve. There will be information in the show notes, but I do hope to meet anyone at Beast and Tales. If you're interested in seeing stories performed live on their feet, these storytellers, the stamina, I think actors have a stamina of being able to do 8 shows a week, or they're able to, do solos throughout a show, but they've got the support of people around them. Storytellers are on their feet for an hour in front of you, just focusing on holding an audience. It's phenomenal to watch. It's a joy to take part in the Beast and Tales. And thank you so much, Tim, for joining me today. Oh, thanks for having us.
We will, and thank you very much. My guest next week, so episode 2, is going to be Joe Strickland. So I'm really looking forward to find out how the Fringe happened. So thank you very much, Tim.
Yeah, great stuff.